The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the small auto parts store in Riverside, California. Sarah Mitchell crouched beside her weathered white van, her hands covered in black grease as she wrestled with a stubborn carburetor. At 34, she had the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of fixing things that others had given up on. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her worn jeans showed the evidence of countless repair jobs. The van had been her home for the past 6 months. Not by choice, but by necessity. After losing her apartment, when the mechanic shop she worked for closed down, Sarah found herself living paycheck to paycheck, taking odd jobs wherever she could find them. The van was more than transportation. It was her shelter, her workshop, and her only constant companion, on a journey that had taken her far from where she ever imagined she would be. Sarah had always been good with her hands. As a child growing up in a small town in Ohio, she spent countless hours in her father's garage, learning the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver before she could properly tie her shoes. Her father, a Vietnam veteran who worked as a local mechanic, taught her that every engine had a heartbeat. And if you listened carefully enough, you could hear what it needed. "Engines don't lie, Sarah," he used to say, his calloused hands guiding hers as they worked together under the hood of their old Chevrolet. "They tell you exactly what's wrong, if you pay attention." Those lessons served her well when she joined the Army at 18. Sarah had enlisted not out of patriotic fervor, but out of a desire to escape the limitations of her small town and maybe find a purpose bigger than herself. The military offered her a chance to use her mechanical skills on a larger scale, working with vehicles and equipment that most civilians never saw. During her 8 years of service, Sarah deployed twice to Afghanistan as a motor transport operator and mechanic. She kept convoy vehicles running in conditions that would challenge even the most experienced civilian mechanics. Desert sand that could destroy an engine in hours. Extreme temperatures that caused metal to expand and contract beyond normal limits. Enemy fire that could disable a vehicle in seconds, requiring immediate field repairs to keep soldiers alive. Her fellow soldiers learned to trust Sarah completely. When their Humvee broke down in the middle of a hostile area, they knew she would get them running again. When other mechanics said a vehicle was beyond repair, Sarah would disappear under the hood for hours, emerging with grease-stained hands and a working engine. She had a gift for improvisation, using whatever materials were available to create solutions that engineering manuals never covered. The tattoo that decorated her left forearm told part of her story. It was a detailed design featuring crossed wrenches surrounded by the words "motor transport" and the dates of her deployments. Below that were the names of 3 fellow soldiers who hadn't made it home. The tattoo artist at the base had worked for hours to get every detail perfect. Understanding the weight of what those names represented, Sarah's service ended abruptly when an improvised explosive device detonated near her convoy during her second deployment. The blast didn't kill her, but the traumatic brain injury and damage to her left leg left her with chronic pain and memory issues that made civilian employment challenging. The transition from military to civilian life proved more difficult than any repair job she had ever attempted. The Department of Veterans Affairs provided some support, but navigating the system required a patience that Sarah's straightforward, problem-solving mind struggled with. Forms that seemed designed to confuse rather than help. Appointments scheduled months in advance. Medical evaluations that reduced her service and sacrifice to a disability rating percentage that determined her monthly compensation. For a while, Sarah tried to make traditional employment work. She found jobs at various auto shops, but her occasional memory lapses and the chronic pain that made long days difficult meant she couldn't maintain steady employment. Employers who initially appreciated her skills grew frustrated when she needed accommodations for her service-connected disabilities. The van had belonged to her father, who passed away while she was struggling to find her footing in civilian life. It was a 1987 Ford E150 that had seen better decades, but Sarah knew every bolt and gasket intimately. After losing her apartment, the van became her refuge. She modified the interior herself, installing a small bed, storage compartments, and even a compact workshop area where she could work on small repair jobs. Living in the van meant constant movement. Sarah would park in different locations each night, sometimes in 24-hour store parking lots, sometimes at rest stops, occasionally in the driveways of other veterans who understood her situation. She survived by taking cash jobs wherever she could find them, fixing lawnmowers for suburban homeowners, changing oil in grocery store parking lots, helping other travelers with broken-down vehicles at highway rest stops. The work kept her fed and kept gas in the tank, but it was a precarious existence. One major repair bill could leave her stranded. One illness could mean missing work and falling behind on the minimal expenses she had. The independence she had always prized was now tinged with vulnerability that she had never experienced during her military service. On this particular morning, Sarah's carburetor problem was more complex than usual. The van had been running rough for several days, and she suspected the issue went beyond a simple cleaning. She had pulled into the auto parts store parking lot hoping to diagnose the problem and maybe purchase whatever parts she needed with the $43 in her wallet. The store didn't open for another hour, but Sarah preferred working in the early morning when the temperature was cooler and fewer people were around to ask questions about why she was living out of her vehicle. She had learned to be self-sufficient out of necessity, but also out of pride. Accepting help had never come easily to someone who had spent years being the person others turned to when things needed fixing. As she worked, Sarah's mind wandered to the letter she had received the week before. Another rejection from the VA regarding her appeal for increased disability compensation. The form letter explained in bureaucratic language that her current rating was appropriate based on their evaluation. It didn't mention that the evaluation had lasted 15 minutes, with a doctor who had never served in the military and seemed more interested in his computer screen than her explanations of how her injuries affected her daily life. The carburetor finally came free, and Sarah examined it in the growing morning light. The float was sticking, and the needle valve showed signs of wear that explained the van's rough idle. It would need a rebuild kit that would cost about $30, assuming the parts store carried one for a vehicle this old. That would leave her with $13 until she could find more work. Sarah had learned not to worry about tomorrow's problems until today's were solved. She set the carburetor aside and began cleaning her hands with the rough paper towels she kept in the van. The sun was climbing higher, and soon the parking lot would fill with morning commuters stopping for coffee and convenience store breakfast sandwiches. The black sedan pulled into the parking lot just as Sarah was reassembling her toolkit. She glanced up briefly, noting the government license plates and the formal way the vehicle was parked. Military precision was something you recognized once you had lived it. The driver who emerged wore a crisp dress uniform with enough ribbons and stars to indicate serious rank. General Marcus Thompson stepped out of his vehicle and immediately noticed the woman working on the van. Something about her methodical approach to organizing her tools caught his attention. He had spent 37 years in the Army, rising through the ranks from second lieutenant to 3-star general. And he had developed an eye for spotting military bearing even in civilian clothes. The general was in town for a veterans event at the local VFW hall. As the current commander of the Army's logistics division, he made it a point to attend these gatherings whenever his schedule allowed. He believed strongly that senior officers had an obligation to stay connected with the enlisted soldiers who had carried out the missions that earned officers their promotions and recognition. General Thompson was reaching into his vehicle for his briefcase when he caught sight of the tattoo on Sarah's forearm. Even from a distance, the crossed wrench's design was unmistakable. He had seen similar tattoos countless times during his career, worn proudly by the motor transport specialists who kept military operations moving forward. These were the soldiers who worked in conditions that would challenge any mechanic, keeping vehicles operational when failure meant mission failure. The general paused, studying the woman more carefully. Her movements as she worked were economical and purposeful. The way she handled her tools suggested years of experience. The modifications he could see inside her van spoke to someone who understood how to maximize limited space and resources. Everything about her suggested military training. But something about her current situation didn't fit. Sarah became aware of the man watching her and looked up. She immediately recognized the rank insignia on his uniform. 3 stars meant serious authority, the kind of officer who made decisions that affected thousands of soldiers. Her instinct was to avoid eye contact and continue with her work. Senior officers rarely had reason to interact with former enlisted personnel, especially those who were currently living in parking lots. General Thompson approached slowly, not wanting to startle the woman or make her feel defensive. He had learned through years of command that the most important conversations often happened in unexpected places, with unexpected people. The parking lot encounter might be more valuable than the formal speeches he would give later that day. "Good morning," the general said, stopping a respectful distance from Sarah's van. "I couldn't help but notice your tattoo." "Motor transport?" Sarah straightened up, unconsciously falling into a more formal posture despite her civilian clothes and current circumstances. "Yes, sir. 8 years, 2 deployments to Afghanistan." The general nodded, recognizing the subtle signs of respect in her response. "What unit?" 642nd Transportation Company, sir. "We ran convoy security and vehicle maintenance throughout Helmand Province." General Thompson's expression changed. He knew that unit and their reputation. The 642nd had operated in some of the most dangerous areas during the height of the conflict. Their casualty rates were high, and their mission success rates were even higher. These were soldiers who had faced enemy fire while keeping supply lines open and critical equipment operational. "The Fighting 642nd, the general said, using the unit's informal designation. "I've read reports about your operations. Outstanding work under extremely difficult conditions." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and discomfort. She appreciated the recognition, but her current circumstances made military honors feel like memories from someone else's life. "Thank you, sir. We had good NCOs and worked well together as a team." The general noticed Sarah's deflection of personal credit onto her unit and leadership. It was another sign of solid military training and character. Good soldiers understood that individual success was always built on team foundation. He also noticed the careful way she stood, favoring her left leg slightly, and the faint scar visible near her hairline. "Are you having vehicle trouble?" General Thompson asked, gesturing toward the disassembled carburetor on Sarah's workbench. "Nothing I can't handle, sir. Just routine maintenance." Sarah's response was automatic, the kind of answer soldiers gave when they didn't want to become someone else's problem. The general recognized the deflection. He had heard similar responses countless times from soldiers who were struggling but didn't want to admit it. Military training emphasized self-reliance and mission accomplishment. Sometimes to a fault, soldiers often suffered in silence rather than ask for help that they perceived as weakness. General Thompson moved closer, examining the carburetor and tools with genuine interest. His early years in the Army had included time as a maintenance officer, and he still appreciated good mechanical work. "Rebuilding the carb yourself? That's becoming a lost art with all the fuel injection systems in modern vehicles." "Yes, sir. This old van doesn't have many computer-controlled systems. It's mostly mechanical, which makes field repairs more practical." Sarah relaxed slightly, finding common ground in the technical discussion. The general spent several minutes examining Sarah's setup. Her tools were old but well-maintained. The modifications to her van showed creativity and skill. Everything was organized with military precision, but the overall situation suggested someone who was living with very limited resources. "How long have you been out of the service?" General Thompson asked. 4 years, sir." Sarah's answer was brief, but the general heard volumes in what she didn't say. "What kind of work are you doing now?" Sarah hesitated. The honest answer was that she was barely surviving on occasional mechanical work and struggling with issues that made traditional employment difficult. But admitting that to a 3-star general felt like admitting failure. "Independent mechanical work, sir. Small jobs, mostly." General Thompson had conducted enough interviews and debriefings to read between the lines. This veteran was struggling, probably dealing with service-connected injuries or disabilities that made civilian employment challenging. The van wasn't just transportation, it was housing. The careful organization of limited possessions told a story of someone making the best of a difficult situation. The general thought about the veterans he had encountered throughout his career who had struggled with similar transitions. Military service provided structure, purpose, and community that civilian life often lacked. For soldiers who had thrived in the military environment, the transition could be devastating, especially when complicated by service-connected injuries. "I'm heading to a veterans event this morning," General Thompson said. "Local VFW is hosting a breakfast and discussion about veteran services. Would you be interested in joining me?" Sarah's first instinct was to decline. Veterans events often felt like displays of problems rather than solutions, well-meaning civilians asking questions about military service that they couldn't really understand. Politicians making promises about veteran support that rarely translated into meaningful help, but something about the general's invitation felt different. He wasn't offering charity or pity. He was extending an invitation as one veteran to another. The respect in his voice suggested that he valued her service regardless of her current circumstances. "I'm not really dressed for a formal event, sir," Sarah said, looking down at her grease-stained work clothes. "Neither am I, after talking with you," the general replied, noticing the grease smudge on his dress uniform sleeve where he had leaned against the van. "Besides, the people who matter will care more about your service than your clothes." Sarah considered the invitation. She had nothing pressing to do until the auto parts store opened, and the general's recognition of her unit and service had awakened something she thought she had buried. For the first time in months, someone had looked at her and seen a soldier rather than a homeless woman living in a van. "Yes, sir. I'd be honored to join you." General Thompson smiled, recognizing the decision as one small step toward reconnecting a veteran with her community and her sense of self-worth. He had learned through decades of leadership that sometimes the most important military operations were the ones that helped soldiers find their way home. The VFW hall buzzed with conversation as General Thompson and Sarah entered together. The room was filled with veterans from different eras. Korean War veterans in their 80s, Vietnam veterans like Sarah's father had been, and younger veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. The mix of generations created an atmosphere where shared experience transcended age differences. Sarah felt immediately self-conscious about her appearance until she noticed that many of the veterans were dressed casually. Work shirts, jeans, and ball caps seemed to be the standard uniform. A few people glanced at the general's dress uniform, but most attention focused on the coffee and breakfast that volunteers from the local community were serving. General Thompson guided Sarah to a table near the front where several other veterans were already seated. He introduced her simply as Sarah Mitchell, Motor Transport Specialist, 642nd Transportation Company, 2 deployments, Afghanistan. The introduction carried weight with the group, who recognized both the unit designation and the significance of multiple deployments. The conversation at the table flowed naturally between shared experiences and current challenges. Sarah found herself talking more than she had in months, drawn out by people who understood military terminology and the complexity of transitioning to civilian life. These veterans didn't need explanations about why certain things were difficult or how military experience translated into civilian skills. When the formal program began, General Thompson was introduced as the keynote speaker. He took the podium with the commanding presence that came from decades of leadership, but his message was surprisingly personal. Instead of talking about policy or statistics, he spoke about the responsibility that successful veterans had to support those who were struggling. "Every veteran in this room has faced challenges that civilians can't fully understand," the general said. "We've all dealt with the gap between military training and civilian expectations. We've all struggled with finding purpose and community outside the structure that the military provided." Sarah listened carefully, recognizing her own experiences in the general's words. He was describing the exact challenges she faced daily. The sense of being trained for excellence but working in environments that didn't value those skills, the isolation that came from leaving a tight-knit military community, the frustration of dealing with systems that seemed designed for people without military experience. "The question isn't whether veterans face these challenges," General Thompson continued. "The question is how we support each other through them. Military training taught us that mission success depends on teamwork. The same principle applies to veteran success in civilian life." After his speech, the general returned to the table where Sarah was engaged in conversation with a Vietnam veteran who ran a small auto repair shop. The older veteran was explaining how difficult it had become to find qualified mechanics who understood older vehicles and weren't dependent on computer diagnostics. "Young mechanics today are trained on modern systems," the shop owner was saying. "They can plug in a computer and follow instructions, but they can't diagnose problems by listening to an engine or feeling how it runs. Those skills are becoming rare." Sarah nodded, understanding the frustration. Her military training had emphasized adaptability and creative problem-solving, skills that were often more valuable than formal certifications. She had learned to diagnose mechanical problems in conditions where computer diagnostics weren't available or reliable. General Thompson listened to the conversation with growing interest. He was watching a connection form between two veterans who could help each other. Sarah needed steady employment, and the shop owner needed a mechanic with old-school skills and military reliability. When the formal event concluded, General Thompson asked Sarah to walk with him back to the parking lot. The morning had warmed considerably, and the auto parts store was now open with a steady stream of customers coming and going. That conversation with Charlie Martinez seemed promising, the general observed, referring to the shop owner Sarah had been talking with. Yes, sir. He mentioned that he might have some part-time work available. Nothing guaranteed, but it's more than I had this morning. The general nodded, pleased that the networking aspect of the event was already producing results. But he had something more significant in mind. During the breakfast, he had made several phone calls to colleagues who worked with veteran employment programs and disability advocacy groups. Sarah, I want you to know that your service hasn't gone unnoticed or unappreciated, General Thompson said. The 642nd Transportation Company's operations directly supported missions that I was involved in planning at the division level. Your unit's success in keeping supply lines open saved lives and enabled mission accomplishment under extremely difficult conditions. Sarah felt emotion rising in her chest. Recognition for military service was meaningful, but recognition from someone who understood the strategic importance of her unit's work was something she had never experienced. More importantly, the general continued, your skills and experience have tremendous value in civilian life. The challenge is connecting those skills with opportunities and ensuring that service-connected disabilities don't prevent you from utilizing your capabilities. General Thompson reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card along with a handwritten note. I've contacted a friend who runs a veteran employment program specifically for transportation and logistics specialists. They work with employers who understand military experience and are willing to provide accommodations for service-connected disabilities. Sarah took the card, reading the contact information for a program she had never heard of. The handwritten note was a personal reference from General Thompson, describing her military service and recommending her for employment assistance. I've also made some calls about your disability rating appeal, the general said. You're entitled to proper evaluation and compensation for injuries sustained in service to your country. There are veteran advocates who specialize in helping with appeals, and they work at no cost to the veteran. The general paused, studying Sarah's reaction. He had learned through years of command that the most meaningful help was often the kind that enabled people to help themselves rather than creating dependency. Sarah, I want you to understand something important. This isn't charity. This is one veteran helping another access resources and opportunities that should be available to all of us. Your service earned you the right to proper support, and my position gives me the ability to help connect you with that support. Sarah struggled with accepting help that felt like special treatment. Military training had emphasized earning everything through individual effort and performance. But she was beginning to understand that veteran support systems were part of the benefits earned through military service. Thank you, sir. I'm not used to accepting help, but I'm learning that maybe that's part of my problem. General Thompson smiled at her honest assessment. Military training teaches self-reliance, which is valuable. But it also teaches teamwork and mutual support. Sometimes accepting help is how you enable yourself to help others in the future. The general prepared to leave, but he had one final gesture that would stay with Sarah for the rest of her life. Despite being in a public parking lot where anyone could observe, General Thompson came to attention and rendered a perfect military salute. The salute wasn't just a recognition of past service. It was an acknowledgement of Sarah's current worth and future potential. It was a 3-star general telling a former enlisted soldier that her service mattered, her struggles were recognized, and her value as a person and veteran remained unchanged by temporary circumstances. Sarah returned the salute with precision that reflected years of military training. Feeling for the first time in months like the soldier she had always been was still there underneath the difficulties of civilian life. 6 months later, Sarah was working full-time at a transportation company that specialized in military contracts. Her mechanical skills and understanding of military logistics made her invaluable for maintaining vehicles that supported base operations. The company provided health insurance that covered her service-connected injuries, and her supervisor was a retired Army sergeant who understood both her capabilities and her accommodation needs. She had moved into a small apartment near the shop and used her van for weekend trips to visit other veterans who were struggling with similar transitions. The tools she had organized so carefully in her mobile workshop now helped her volunteer with a program that provided free mechanical services to veterans who couldn't afford commercial repairs. Sarah never forgot the morning when a general recognized her tattoo and saw past her circumstances to the soldier she remained. The salute became a reminder that military service created a permanent bond between veterans, regardless of rank or current situation. Most importantly, it taught her that accepting help was not a sign of weakness, but an opportunity to eventually provide help to others who needed it.